Hello everyone, and welcome to the second in this series of the Cosette Picture My Life cards, or the pocket cards, that I'm going to make over into a 12 by 12 double page spread. I've got the cards spread out in front of me, and you might notice I've made a couple of changes. If you watched the first video, I did a little sorting process and I grouped some of the PML cards together to use on my pages. These ones here were primarily the third grouping that I showed, but I wanted to jump into this one for a more masculine feel after doing a more feminine feel with the first video. I'm not going to be using this card on this page, I don't think. I'm just going to put this aside as I go through the process. I may bring that back in. So you'll notice I've got these spread in front of me. This was a 3x4 card and I've cut it out from the stitched fancy brackets. I've used the largest one. This is from the core catalogue and is currently still available. And this one here is a 6x4 PML card, and I trimmed it down a little bit on the sides and then did some partial die cutting at the top and the bottom so that I got this fancy border cut here. And then I had some pieces left over at the top and bottom that I've made into tabs. You may remember that I fussy cut out the typewriter from the original PML card, and I kept those pieces because I do have these ones left over. Now, if you remember, these are all double-sided, so if you turn these over, even though these have been cut, you get a totally different feel for the actual pages. So you can do a colorway, whichever you like. You can make this a more feminine style page and introduce some of the floral elements, but I've decided to go with a masculine feel with this one. I'm just going to turn all these over. This PML card I'd originally set aside to use on the very first layout, and you can see, I think that I've got that round the right way, or it might be this way. Oops, it's round this way. And you can see that that has the mint type color, but I really liked it with these PML cards here, so I didn't use it on the first one, and I've simply just cut that in half. And for this PML card, it's a 3x4. Instead of using the large image with the Eiffel Tower, I decided I wanted to use the smaller image, and you'll see why as I go through putting this layout together. And I've separated the words from the artwork here because I want to bring both of these colorways into both sides. If I leave it all up on this side of the page, then I don't have any of this sort of artwork with this French vanilla color tone over on this side. So that is why I've decided to split that. While I've got this here, I am going to ink the edges of this in pine. Now the base layers of these layouts are actually in pine cardstock. I'll just bring that over so you can see it a little bit better with the contrast here rather than against the black of the Versamat. And I've done the same thing that I did with the previous layout. I've gutted out the inside, trimmed my French vanilla piece down to 11 3/4 by 11 3/4 and placed that on top. And then the inside pieces of these are going to be my photo mats. I've got these two 6x4 pieces. I'm not going to trim these down at all. They're going to become elements on the page, but I am going to ink up the edges of this little PML that I cut, not exactly in half, but to separate the Eiffel Tower from the script words. And I'm just inking the edges up in pine here, because I want a little bit of contrast when they're up against the French vanilla base. They sort of get a little bit lost. So it doesn't actually take much to do that. And I think while I've got that out, I'm going to ink up some of the other edges in Toffee. So I've got my Toffee ink here. I'll just put that off to the side. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to ink all of these other elements just with a little bit of Toffee ink to give them a bit of a vintage feel. So using a sponge dauber, you can use one of the mini blending tools. You can do this with a blending brush if you want more definition. It doesn't take that long to do, but I do recommend that you do it away from your artwork because sometimes the sponge pieces will flick a little bit of ink on them. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of these pieces, and then I will be back to start with the construction of the pages. I've set all my little inked up pieces aside, but I just wanted to say that when I was looking at this one on the page, the green was just a little bit too bright with the pine. So I have toned that down a bit more by going over the edges with the toffee and the sponge dauber just to give it a more vintage feel. Now you'll notice with this page here, I've got some stamping along the border here. And what I've done is bring in the ornamental borders. So I'm using this stamp set on these two pages, and I'm also using family roots. Now for some reason I didn't get the die cuts with these, so I have had to do a little bit of fussy cutting, but I am bringing in these two images and the arrow, and I think I'm going to use this little element as well. But what I wanted to show you was my process of working out what borders I like to use on the edge before I do the stamping. So I've got a piece of French vanilla here. You can see I've been doing some playing. And I'm going to use Toffee ink. I'm just going to set this one aside. And this is the process that I go through to work out what ink I want to use and whether I want to use first or second generation stamping. So I just go through and I stamp up. I'm just going to move this so I can see where the edge is. And that's first generation, and I think it's a little bit too strong. So what I would then do is do a little bit of second generation stamping. I can flip this over and do it on the other side. Actually, I will do that because the ink dried a little bit. So I'm just going to stamp here, flip that over and stamp again. And you can see I decided to go with the second generation because I thought it had just a bit of a softer feel. So I've gone all the way along the right edge of my right page. So I'm going to go all the way along the edge of my left page as well. And I'm going to stamp off in between each stamping. I'm just going to bring in some copy paper to use. Ink this up, stamp. And then I've put my block down, I've put the stamp image down below rather than in the center, so it gives me a good line of sight to where the edge is. And this was a little bit of luck, but this fits pretty much perfectly two of these borders by cutting it at 11 3/4. You can see that creates a great border, and I think it might be enough for these pages. I don't know if I'm going to go across the top edges. So what I'm going to do is sort of do a dry fit and decide whether or not I need to continue that border all the way across as well on the top and the bottom edges of my pages. So let's do a little bit of a dry fit to see what this looks like. I'm going to use 4x4 photos. So I'm thinking I might do a grid sort of style. And I have had a bit of a play with this previously so that I had some direction before I hit the record button. And then I'm going to bring in these two 6x4 pieces. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do is have this come right down to the edge, and then the photos grouped around that. And then this one is going to go right to the left edge. So it's going a little bit over the mat here. And then this grouping of photos can sit in a format like this. And what these 6x4 PML cards are doing are effectively giving a place for my embellishments to land. Now the embellishments in this case are all these PML cards. So let's go for a dry fit with this. I'm going to have one of the titles on this side because I feel like Let Me Tell You a Story, Life is Better With You will flow across for the title to be connected that way. And then I'm going to start tucking elements around so that they are in some way connected here, and then they will all fit together. I've got my typewriter element. I can put a little bit over the top of this U here because you can still tell that the word is U, but I want to put this part of the postcard PML, and you can see why I've separated those out. I've got this PML card that I have separated. I do want to have the words looking like they go around the right way. So that looks pretty good. I might just see whether or not I like the look of that there. Sort of brings in more text. And the reason why I cut this in half is because I wanted to have some text on this side as well. So this one can tuck somewhat underneath this area here. I've got the little stitched bracket pieces. I'm going to use those as elements as well. Maybe I'll bring in some more green on this side. I can just tuck it underneath that Eiffel Tower piece. And I've got a yellow one on that side, so it makes sense to have a yellow one on this side. And there's not much green over in this little grouping as well. So what I might do is bring this one over a little bit so that it's a little bit over that photo. I may be able to move that back a bit. The problem with dry fitting is that everything just starts moving around. So this little green tab can tuck behind that part of the postcard. I'm quite happy with how all of this is looking. I'm going to bring in some elements that I stamped, and these are from the family roots. So I've done the arrow, the pocket watch, and the camera, and these have all been stamped in Toffee ink. So I'm just going to decide where I would like to place these. I think an arrow works really well. Let me tell you a story, even though it's got the dot, 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 and it leads down to here. I think that might work well, tucked in just a little bit under this stitched bracket piece. Got a little bit of a gap here. I was going to put the camera on this side, but it's sort of pointing off towards the right. So I think what I'm going to do is tuck this in amongst this little grouping here. And then this little pocket watch can just go off to the side over here. So I quite like how this is all coming together. And I think I will do the stamping with this section just underneath this photo placeholder here and at the top here. I'm going to go away, I'm going to adhere all of this down, and then I'm going to reassess whether or not I need to put some more stamping. But I think it might make it a little bit too heavy. I quite like just having the two outer pieces done with this. And I do have this card set aside for this layout. So I'm sort of thinking I could cut a couple of those out so that they still have the stitched elements, and they could be some strip journaling going out from here. I could fit two in here, not a problem at all. And then maybe these ones can be used on the third and final layout that I'm going to do very, very soon. So I'll be right back after I've adhered all of these down to do some final dressing up on these pages and some added little extra touches. I've got all the pieces adhered now, so you can see the grid format works quite well. And instead of sprinkling the PML cards all the way across the layout, I've made two distinct clusters with them and the additional elements with the stamping. Now, what I decided to do with this PML is chop it up just a little bit, and I'm going to have my journaling coming out from here. I've cut them with, I fussy cut these out with my scissors because I wanted it to be quite close to the edge of the stitching. And I'm going to put these so that they go across this wood area here of this pocket card. But I am going to stagger them so the other one lines up with the left side of this photo holder here. And I think I might have this one just a little bit crooked. So thankfully using like a dot roller gives you time to pick things up and move them. They're a lot harder to get off with a dot roller or a tape runner if they've been sitting for a little while, but that worked out quite well. So I quite like how that worked. Now I'm going to turn this over so that I've got the spongy side so I can do some stamping. I just need to clean off this border stamp and put that back on the stamp set image. Now when I do this, these are quite long. I don't just get from the end and tear them off like that. I do like to give it a little bit of support so I don't damage the stamp. And I really do love all of these borders, but I just felt like the more subtle one or the smaller one worked well with these pages because it is a more masculine feel. For some reason, I look at these and I think they're very elegant, but that's just a little bit too florally. And this didn't quite work out on a scrapbook layout, but you could definitely frame up a photo with this. How good would that look around the edge of a photo? And I do love this medallion style or tile style one as well. So it's such a good set. I do love the border sets. Now I've got this one here from the Family Roots. I'm going to push it up against the side of my mat. I love this very cool trick that Carol and Joan showed me, just so that I can get everything nice and lined up and nice and straight. I am going to do a test stamp with it though, just to make sure. And I'm thinking that I might do this in pine. So I'm going to do 2 little stamps with it to see which one I like the best. So this is where having all these little bits of scrap paper really come in handy, just to do some testing, especially if I'm stamping straight onto my scrapbook layout. So I'll just cut a couple of strips here. I'm going to try with pine ink. I'm just going to season this because I haven't used it. And as I said in my last video, when you're using something with such a delicate area, don't press down too hard to smoosh out the ink. So that's what it would look like if it was first generation pine. Let's have a look at what it would look like with second generation. I'm not minding that, but I want to do a test in Toffee. Put this aside for the moment. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to ink up first generation one, and then I'm going to do a second generation to see what I like the look of. So the pine's quite strong. The Toffee just sort of works for me, I think. It just makes everything look like it's supposed to belong. So I think I'm going to do the second generation stamping for these. Just going to bring in another scrap so I can stamp off. I'll just put this aside for the moment. Ink this up. Do a light stamping on here and then put this at the bottom of this photo here. It just finishes it off quite nicely. And I'm thinking that I might do it at the top as well. It'll just complete this little row. Stamp off. So that's looking very, very cute. I'm not going to do it on this side because I've got this little tab here. I'm going to repeat that though for this one here. So I'll just leave that there so I can stamp off again. Normally I would just put my head right over so that I can line it all up, but it's easier when I'm doing this on camera to have things closer towards me. So that's why I'm rotating things around. Just bring in my other page. And I think this is looking rather good. I am going to look for some little dots to put on here. So I might dig through what I have and then put some of those on, and then I'll be back with how I've sprinkled those around and also some still shots of these as well. I just want to mention before I do that, that currently we have a cardstock carnival special. So make sure you check that out. Cardstock is something that we always use in paper crafting, be it for bases, for feature elements on a page, for mats, all those sorts of things. So now's a really good time to stock up on your cardstock. I will put a link to the Cardstock Carnival below. I'm waiting for an order to arrive. It's in Melbourne, so I'm waiting for it to arrive so I can show you the exclusive die cuts that are with that too. So hopefully that will be here by the time I do my next video, so you can check those out. What I've decided to do for the added little accessory for this is to bring in some of these dots, and you might be looking at these and thinking, oh, purple, but I'm going to colour them with the Spectrum Noir metallic paint marker. This is molten copper. I'm using the 3mm tip. I will zoom this in a little bit so that you can see what I'm doing, I'm painting all the way around each of these elements and making sure that I get down inside the areas as well. And because this is a paint, it does need some time to dry. So I'm just inking these up now and covering the whole entire area, making sure that I get into the crevices here so none of this wisteria type colour will actually show through. I did try using this on our silver glitter gems, but it just didn't quite adhere properly. It seemed to just go over the top but not coat the actual gem itself. But I think you'll agree that these are going to look quite nice in and around these elements with the molten copper. So hang around for the still shots. I will place all of those on here and you'll be able to see where I've put them. I'm just going to keep painting these ones up so that I know and that I've got enough to go onto this layout. And I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Check the description box below, click on see more so you can see all of the details, and I will put a link to the previous one using this Cosette pocket cards, and I'll also have a link there for the playlist as well so that you're able to check out all the videos I've done creating 12 by 12 layouts just from PML cards and a little bit of cardstock. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy crafting. See you next time. Bye for now.